No, 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 Larry. Don't reboot the mainframe. For the love of all that is holy, do not touch that button. I leaned forward, my forehead nearly pressing against the cool glass of my primary monitor. On the screen, the face of a Fortune 500 CTO, a man named Larry who made more in a month than I did in a year, was slick with the kind of sweat only unmitigated digital catastrophe can produce. "But the servers are smoking, Alex," he squeaked, his voice a panicked falsetto. "That's just the load balancers rerouting terabytes of failed transactions, Larry," I said, my own voice a mask of zen-like calm. "Your server isn't possessed. The intern you hired, the one with the liberal arts degree and a deep-seated misunderstanding of SQL, tried to divide your entire customer database by zero. It's a digital fire. But don't worry. I'm the Ghostbuster." My fingers flew across the keyboard, a blur of motion. Lines of code scrolled past on my second monitor, a waterfall of green text against a black background. This was my sanctuary, my temple. A home office meticulously organized, with cables managed with a precision that would make a drill sergeant weep with pride. 3 monitors formed a gentle curve on my desk, a cockpit from which I piloted the chaotic skies of the internet for a hefty fee. This is what I left the Air Force for. No more 4 a.m. wake-up calls, no more sand in places sand should never be. Just the quiet hum of my server rack, the satisfying click of my mechanical keyboard, and the digital screams of incompetent IT departments willing to pay me a small fortune to make it all stop. I thrive on chaos, as long as it stays on the other side of the screen. "Okay, I'm pushing a patch now, Larry," I said, hitting the enter key with a decisive tap. "You should see the smoke turning into a gentle, money-scented vapor in about 3, 2, 1. On Larry's screen, a red warning light on a server behind him blinked off. His shoulders slumped in relief. "Alex, you're a lifesaver, a veritable wizard. I don't know what we'd do without you." "You'd be selling artisanal driftwood on Etsy, Larry," I muttered to myself. "Don't worry about it," I said aloud. "Just remember to chain that intern to his desk. And for God's sake, revoke his admin privileges." As Larry began his profuse, gushing thanks, a single, innocuous email notification popped up in the corner of my screen. It was the digital equivalent of a single fly buzzing in a pristine, silent cathedral. The sender was HOA Whispering Pines, and the subject line was a declaration of war written in the passive-aggressive font of suburban tyranny. Urgent HOA violation, unapproved landscaping, and potential structural modification. I sighed. A dispatch from the Queen herself. "Brenda." I minimized Larry's beaming face. My eyes drifted to the window overlooking my meticulously manicured front lawn, a lawn I paid a service to keep perfect specifically to avoid these kinds of emails. The unapproved landscaping in question was a single, defiant sunflower my 7-year-old niece Chloe had planted during her last visit. It had, to my immense pride and Brenda's obvious horror, grown a good 6 inches taller than the officially sanctioned, soul-crushingly beige petunias that dotted the rest of the neighborhood. It was a cheerful, yellow exclamation point in a paragraph of monotonous prose. The potential structural modification was, of course, my baby. Disguised with a custom-made shell of faux foliage and positioned to look like a piece of abstract garden sculpture, it was a decommissioned X-band military surplus satellite dish. It was capable of pulling down enough data to stream every movie ever made, simultaneously in 8K, while also communicating with the International Space Station. I'd bought it at an online government auction and told the neighbors it was an art installation, exploring the duality of nature and technology. Most of them just nodded slowly and backed away. It was the best purchase I had ever made. A wicked smile touched my lips. I opened a new email to HOA Whispering Pines. Subject: your urgent concerns. Dear Brenda, I typed. Thank you for your vigilant oversight. Regarding the unapproved flora, I refer you to HOA Bylaw 7, Section C, Paragraph 4, which permits seasonal decorative plantings of a non-invasive nature. The Helianthus annuus in question is both seasonal and, I assure you, has no plans to invade Poland. Regarding the structural modification, I've attached a JPEG from a leading modern art blog featuring a piece by the renowned and entirely fictional sculptor Jean-Pierre Lecoq. As you can see, his work bears a striking resemblance to my own installation. I trust this clears up any confusion. Stay vigilant. Best, Alex. I hit send with a flourish of self-satisfaction. Checkmate. I leaned back in my chair, the IT crisis averted, the HOA crisis elegantly deflected. It was a good day to be a digital monk in my quiet suburban monastery. I was, of course, catastrophically wrong. A few hours later, I was outside, giving my triumphant sunflower a drink of water, when a shadow fell across the lawn. It was a long, thin shadow, preceded by the faint scent of disapproval and lavender potpourri. It was Brenda. She stood on the sidewalk, her hands on her hips, her clipboard held against her chest like a ballistic shield. Her visor was pulled down low, casting a tactical shadow over her eyes. She was a 50-something suburban commando on a mission to eradicate joy. Alexander, she said, her voice devoid of warmth. She never called me Alex. To her, I was Alexander, a formal declaration that I was and always would be a problem. Brenda, I replied, giving her my most charming, least sincere smile. Come to admire the art? I am here to discuss your sculpture, she said, her lip curling around the word as if it tasted foul. And this? She gestured at the sunflower with her clipboard. It's ostentatious. It's a plant, Brenda. It follows the sun. It has no ego. It's taller than the permitted height for seasonal decor, she snapped, tapping a line on her clipboard. And your sculpture. It looks like it's tracking Russian satellites. I couldn't help myself. Only the artistic ones, I said deadpan. The ones that broadcast ballet. This, I could tell, was the wrong thing to say. Her eyes narrowed. The pleasantries were over. The argument devolved quickly, a masterclass in petty grievances. She pivoted from the dish to the flower, then to the fact that my recycling bin, which I had retrieved from the curb that morning, was visible from the street, a clear violation of Section 9. I countered by pointing out that her own welcome mat, a garish thing that said "Bless this mess," contained 3 unapproved colors according to the community's exterior decor palette. She was losing, and she knew it. A cornered animal is a dangerous thing, but a cornered HOA president is a weapon of mass destruction. Her eyes scanned my property, desperately seeking a new line of attack, a fresh violation to cling to. And then they landed on the gray utility box on the side of my house. A thick, black, coaxial cable ran from the telephone pole at the curb, snaked down the side of my house, and entered the box. It was the umbilical cord of my digital existence. "This is a disgrace," she declared, marching over to it. "These exposed wires are a safety hazard. They're unsightly." Brenda, that's the main internet feed for the house. It was installed by the cable company. It's their property, I said, a knot of dread forming in my stomach. "I don't care who installed it," she hissed. "It's a blight. And I've heard from concerned neighbors about the sheer amount of internet you're using. It's slowing everyone else down. It's probably not even legal." I opened my mouth to explain the fundamental principles of network infrastructure, to tell her that's not how any of this works, that my dedicated business line had no impact on her ability to stream cat videos, but I never got the chance. She reached into the large canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder, a bag I always assumed contained nothing but HOA violation notices and gluten-free snacks, and pulled out a pair of heavy-duty, rust-colored garden shears. The world seemed to slow down. The chirping of the birds, the distant hum of a lawnmower, it all faded away. There was only the glint of the sun on the steel blades. "Brenda," I said, my voice low and urgent. "Wait. Don't." Her face was a mask of righteous fury. She saw herself as a crusader, a warrior of beige, a defender of neighborhood standards. She wasn't just cutting a cable, she was striking a blow against nonconformity. Snip. The sound was shockingly final, a dull metallic crunch that echoed in the quiet afternoon air. The thick black cable, severed cleanly in two, fell to the ground in a pathetic, limp curl. The effect was instantaneous. My smartwatch, which had been tethered to my home's Wi-Fi, buzzed with a disconnected notification. Through the window, I could see the array of lights on my router blink from a healthy blue to a panicked, angry orange before going dark. My home's digital heartbeat had flatlined. Brenda dusted her hands off, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. "There," she said, as if she had just vanquished a dragon. "Problem solved. I'm putting a stop to your excessive downloading." She turned and marched away, her sensible shoes clicking on the pavement, leaving me standing in the wreckage of my digital life. I stared at the severed cable, the two clean-cut ends lying on the grass like a dead snake. A wave of pure, cold rage washed over me. I felt it in my teeth, in my fingertips. But then, another feeling bubbled up through the anger, something dark and deeply, wonderfully amusing. A slow smile spread across my face. I looked at the now useless router, blinking its sad little light. I looked up at the sky, where, invisible to the naked eye, a military satellite floated in geosynchronous orbit, waiting patiently for my call. I looked in the direction of Brenda's retreating figure. "Oh, you have no idea what you've just done," I whispered to the empty air. "You think you cut me off? Lady, you just gave me permission to go loud." I walked back inside, my steps light, my purpose clear. The quiet life was officially over. It was time to go to war. My office, my former sanctuary of peace, became a war room. There was no panic, no frantic cursing. Panic is for people without a plan B. My entire life was a series of contingency plans. I was about to execute Plan B7, codename Operation Unbranded. I knelt and slid a heavy, hardened pelican case from under my desk. The latches popped open with a satisfying hiss of equalized pressure. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was my real computer, a ruggedized military-spec laptop and a control module that looked like it belonged in a nuclear submarine. This wasn't for surfing the web. This was for controlling the web. I calmly disconnected the now useless civilian router. I took the thick, armored data cable from the Pelican case and ran it through a pre-drilled, sealed hole in the wall behind my desk, a little modification I'd made the week I moved in. The cable terminated just outside, at the base of my sculpture. I connected it with a heavy-duty screw-on and lock connector. Back inside, I fired up the ruggedized laptop. The screen flickered to life, not with a cheerful Windows logo, but with a stark, black, text-based operating system. A single line blinked patiently. Enter authentication code. I typed in a 32-character alphanumeric password, a string of gibberish I had long since committed to muscle memory. The screen flashed. Authentication accepted. Welcome, Echo. Echo. My old Air Force call sign. It felt good to see it again. Another prompt appeared. Initiate X-band uplink, YN. I typed Y and hit enter. Outside, a faint whirring sound cut through the afternoon quiet. My beautiful, misunderstood piece of postmodern art came to life. The faux foliage trembled as the dish beneath it moved with silent, deadly precision, tilting itself a few degrees to the south, locking onto its target 22,236 miles above the Earth. A final line appeared on my screen. Uplink established. Bandwidth unrestricted. Welcome to the grid. On my commercial laptop, I scanned for new Wi-Fi networks. A single new SSID appeared at the top of the list, blasting out a signal at full strength. It was called Skynet_actual. I connected. The password was a line from my favorite sci-fi movie. I opened a browser window and ran a speed test. The digital needle on the gauge didn't just climb, it teleported. It shattered the gigabit barrier and kept going. The final number was so high it had to be a mistake. This wasn't internet. This was a fire hose of pure data. The whole process, from the moment Brenda's shears had crunched through my cable to the moment I was back online with a connection that would make NORAD jealous, had taken exactly 1 minute and 47 seconds. I leaned back, basking in the glow of overwhelming technical superiority. I drafted a quick email to Larry, the sweaty CTO. "Apologies for the brief disconnect," I wrote. "We had some minor atmospheric disturbance. Everything is resolved now, and much, much faster." Just as I was about to hit send, a thought struck me. It was a horrible, wonderful, electrifying thought. The utility plans for the neighborhood. I had downloaded the full municipal schematics when I was planning my server room's dedicated power line. I had a thing for due diligence. I navigated through my local files and pulled up the PDF. It was a dense, complex map of wires, pipes, and conduits. I found my property. I found the telephone pole at the curb. I traced the path of the thick, black cable Brenda had so gleefully severed. My eyes followed the line. It ran from the pole to the utility box on my house, and then it kept going. The schematic showed it diving underground, running the length of my street, Whispering Pines Lane. It was a primary fiber optic trunk. My finger traced the line on the screen to its termination point, half a mile away. It was a squat, windowless brick building. A building I passed every day on my way to the grocery store. It was labeled in stark block letters. On the city's official plan, North County Emergency Communications Center. I stared at the screen, the pieces clicking into place with a horrifying, hilarious clang. Brenda, the shears, the cable. "Brenda," I whispered, a slow grin spreading across my face. "You magnificent, short-sighted, power-tripping moron." She hadn't just declared war on my sunflower. She hadn't just cut me off from my World of Warcraft raid. She had disconnected the 911 call center for the entire northern half of the county. I leaned back in my chair, the gravity and the dark, beautiful humor of the situation washing over me. This was no longer a petty squabble. This just got a whole lot more interesting. I took a slow sip of my now cold coffee. The game had changed, and I was the only one with a working internet connection. An hour later, as I was methodically documenting the severed cable with my high-resolution camera for the inevitable lawsuit, there was a knock on my door. Not the frantic, clipboard-wielding rap of Brenda, but a more formal, solid knock. I peered through the peephole. 2 police officers stood on my porch, their expressions a mixture of boredom and purpose. I opened the door. The older one had a magnificent mustache that had clearly seen things, and a weary, seen-it-all look in his eyes. His name tag read Miller. The younger one, Davis, was clutching a notepad like it was the only thing tethering him to a sane world. "Good afternoon, sir," Officer Miller said, his voice a low rumble. "Sorry to bother you. We're responding to a major communications outage in the area. Seems the 911 call center is completely offline. Just canvassing the neighborhood. Is your internet out?" I feigned a look of thoughtful concern, then shook my head. "Nope. Solid as a rock," I said, taking a casual sip of tea I'd prepared for just this occasion. "Was just on a video call with a client in Tokyo. Pandacams are a surprisingly robust market these days." Davis, the younger cop, frowned in confusion. "But the entire grid is down. The phone company is in a total panic. They're telling us a primary trunk line has been severed. How do you have service?" I gave him my most earnest, helpful look. "I pay extra for the disgruntled HOA president package," I said. "Comes with redundancy." Miller just sighed, a deep, world-weary sound, but Davis was scribbling furiously in his notepad. "Disgruntled, HOA, package," he muttered. I decided it was time to help their investigation along. "You know," I said, my voice dropping conspiratorially, "now that you mention it, I did have a bit of vandalism earlier today." I led them around the side of my house, to the scene of the crime. I pointed a dramatic finger at the severed cable. "Some lunatic with shears cut my main line right here. The cut is real clean. Professional, almost. But my backup system kicked in immediately. Lucky me, I guess." I saw the gears turning in Miller's head. I pulled my tablet from my back pocket, already loaded with the municipal grid map. "Funny thing is," I continued, zooming in on the schematic, "according to the county plans, this line doesn't just feed my house. It's the primary data line for the 911 center. What a wild coincidence, huh?" Miller and Davis looked at the map, then at the severed cable, then at each other. A silent, weary communication passed between them. Their vague, mysterious outage investigation had just slammed into a very specific, very petty reality. "Sir," Miller began, his voice careful, "did you happen to see who did this?" I put on my best, trying to remember face. "Now that you mention it, yes, a woman. Mid-50s, I'd say, white visor, clipboard, sensible shoes, radiated an aura of pure, unadulterated rage about my sunflower over there." I pointed at the proud, yellow flower. Miller closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose so hard I thought he might leave a dent. He didn't even need to ask. "Brenda?" he muttered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. It was clear this was not his first Brenda-related incident. They thanked me for my time, their demeanor having shifted entirely. They were no longer on a canvassing mission. They were on their way to interrogate a person of interest. As they walked back to their patrol car, I heard Davis say, "Wait, so she took out the 911 system because of a flower?" And Miller's tired reply, "Kid, you have no idea." I gave them a friendly wave as they drove off, a grim sense of satisfaction settling over me. I wasn't just the victim anymore. I was a material witness in a federal crime. This was getting better and better. The next morning, I stood in my backyard, surveying the scene. My internet connection was faster than a speeding bullet, but the physical setup, the armored cable snaking across my perfectly manicured lawn to the base of my sculpture, was a temporary field expedient solution. It was an eyesore, a violation, even, by Brenda's standards. The irony was delicious, but I needed a permanent, Brenda-proof fix. I needed to go underground. This was not a job for your average landscaping company. This was a job for professionals. I pulled out my phone and made a call to a number I hadn't used in years. "A-Team Infrastructure," a gravelly voice answered. "You break it, we fortify it." "Hector, it's Echo," I said. There was a pause, then a delighted laugh. "Echo, my man. I thought you'd gone soft, living the civilian life. What'd you do, piss off the neighbors? Something like that, I said. I need a secure, subterranean data conduit installed. Hostile environment. High threat, low drag. You guys still in the game? Brother, we are the game, Hector said. We'll be there in an hour. They arrived in a matte black van with no windows that looked like it had been through a small war. Hector hopped out of the passenger side. He was a wiry, hyperactive spark plug of a man, his mind clearly moving at 1,000 miles an hour. The driver's door opened, and Dave unfolded himself from the van. Dave was a mountain. A quiet, gentle giant of a man who could probably bench press the van. He was their heavy equipment specialist. He communicated mostly in grunts and short, declarative sentences. We didn't have a meeting in my kitchen. We convened in my garage for what Hector immediately dubbed a mission briefing. He unrolled a satellite image of my property on the hood of my car. "All right, Echo," Hector began, pacing like a general before a battle. "The objective is to establish a hardened conduit from the municipal access point. We'll call it the source, to your server room, the sanctuary. Hostile element, codename Karen, is actively patrolling the area of operations. We need to be fast, clean, and leave no trace. We're going with shielded, armored, fiber optic cable, rated to withstand small arms fire, and more importantly, aggressive gardening tools." "Just try not to piss off my neighbor to the south," I said, pointing on the map. "He's got prize-winning roses. That's a two-front war I'm not ready to fight." Dave, who had been silently studying the image, grunted. "Roses safe," he said. "Dig deep." The operation commenced at 0500 the next morning, under the cover of pre-dawn darkness. It was a symphony of stealth construction. Dave wheeled out a machine I'd never seen before, a sort of directional trencher that was unnervingly quiet. It didn't chew up the lawn. It surgically sliced it, lifting a perfect ribbon of sod and dirt, laying the armored cable in the bottom of the narrow trench, and then placing the sod back down in one smooth, continuous motion. Hector provided running commentary and direction with a series of precise hand signals, occasionally speaking into a walkie-talkie. 2 degrees starboard, Big D," he'd whisper. "We're approaching the sprinkler line. Easy does it." I watched, sipping my coffee, from the kitchen window. At one point, a light flicked on in Brenda's house across the street. Her silhouette appeared in the window, peering out into the darkness. But all she could see was 3 guys standing in a yard that looked exactly the same as it had the day before. She watched for a full 5 minutes, her suspicion palpable even from 100 yards away, before the light clicked off. She knew something was up, but she couldn't prove it. The sheer, impotent rage she must have felt brought me an immense, profound joy. The whole operation, from the first cut to the final invisible seam in my lawn, took 90 minutes. They packed up their gear, we exchanged a handshake and a discreet digital payment, and then they were gone, melting back into the morning mist like a ghost unit. My house was now secretly hardwired with a connection that was not only insanely fast, but was also, for all intents and purposes, completely invulnerable to any threat short of a direct airstrike. Let Brenda bring her shears now. I was ready. The digital world, as it turned out, was a much more effective battlefield than my front lawn. The local news had picked up the story of the 911 outage, framing it as a mysterious and dangerous act of criminal vandalism that had endangered the entire community. The article was filled with anxious quotes from the police chief and harrowing anecdotes from people whose emergency calls had gone unanswered. The neighborhood's next-door forum, a digital space usually reserved for arguments about lost cats and teenagers skateboarding on the sidewalk, became ground zero for the fallout. And Brenda, in an act of breathtaking hubris, decided to light the fuse herself. She posted a message, dripping with self-congratulatory concern. So glad the authorities are investigating the recent internet issues. Hopefully, they'll look into residents with illegal modifications and excessive bandwidth usage that puts a strain on our community resources. Some of us are trying to maintain neighborhood standards and public safety. I read the post and nearly choked on my coffee. The audacity was magnificent. She was trying to frame herself as the hero of the story. This could not stand. It was time for a little psyops. I fired up my VPN, routed my connection through a server in Iceland, and created a new anonymous Nextdoor account, Whispering Pines Watcher. I scrolled to Brenda's post and typed a carefully worded reply. "That's a fascinating perspective, Brenda," I wrote. "Speaking of public safety, is it true that the vandalism the police are investigating happened in broad daylight with a pair of garden shears, and that the primary person of interest they've questioned was involved in a dispute with a neighbor over a sunflower? Just asking what I've heard from sources close to the investigation. Seems like a strange coincidence." To add a little gasoline to the fire, I used my rudimentary Photoshop skills to create a document that looked like a snippet of an official police incident report. I redacted most of the information, but left a few key phrases visible. Destruction of public utility property. Witness described suspect, and garden shears entered into evidence. I attached it to the post. Then I leaned back and watched the world burn. The forum imploded. The effect was instantaneous and glorious. It was a digital firestorm. The first reply came from a user named Soccer Mom Deb. "Wait, are you saying Brenda cut the 911 cable over a flower?" Another one, from Grumpy Gary. "My mother had a fall yesterday and we couldn't get through for 20 minutes. I'm calling my lawyer and the police." And my personal favorite, from Carol_in_number_42. "I knew it! She told me my doormat was aggressively nonconformist last week. The woman is unhinged." The thread became a rolling avalanche of outrage. Decades of pent-up resentment against Brenda's petty tyranny came pouring out. People shared stories of her measuring their lawn height with a ruler, of her issuing formal warnings about unapproved wreath materials during Christmas, of her trying to get a child's brightly colored playset declared a public nuisance. Brenda's carefully constructed kingdom of rules and regulations was crumbling around her in real time. She tried to fight back, posting frantic denials, but it was too late. She was buried under an avalanche of angry exclamation points and accusatory memes. She tried to delete the thread, but two more would spring up in its place. Her digital authority had been revoked by the very people she sought to control. She was no longer the queen. She was the court jester, and everyone was laughing. That night, the sky decided to join the chaos. A storm rolled in, not a gentle spring shower, but a full-blown biblical thunderstorm. The clouds were a bruised purple, and the wind howled like a vengeful spirit. The sky was ripped open by jagged slashes of lightning, followed by claps of thunder so loud they rattled the windows in their frames. I was in my office, monitoring the storm on a live weather radar, more out of professional habit than any real concern. My systems were protected by surge protectors and a heavy-duty uninterruptible power supply. Let the storm do its worst. And then it did. There was a brilliant, blinding flash of white light, followed by a deafening crack that sounded like the sky itself was splitting in two. A power transformer down the street exploded in a shower of sparks. My office lights flickered and died. The entire neighborhood was plunged into an inky, primordial darkness. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the reassuring hum of my UPS kicked in. My monitors flickered back to life, their glow the only light in the house. My systems were online. My satellite connection was unaffected. I was an island of digital light in an ocean of analog darkness. but at the North County Emergency Communications Center, their situation was far more dire. Their backup generators roared to life, restoring power to the building, but the temporary, flimsy patch the phone company had put on their severed internet line couldn't handle the power surge. It fried instantly. Once again, they were completely and utterly blind. They had lights, they had power, but they had no data. No incoming calls. No way to see the locations of their units. No way to dispatch emergency services. My phone, powered by my own network, rang. The caller ID was Stark. "Miller, W," I answered. The sound of the storm raged in the background, but Miller's voice cut through it, strained and urgent. "Alex, it's Miller. Are you there? Can you hear me?" "Loud and clear, officer," I said. "Everything okay on your end?" "No, son, it is not," he said, and I could hear the barely controlled panic in his voice. "We're in the dark here. The whole system just crashed again. We have a 5-car pileup on the interstate and reports of a house fire from a lightning strike on Arbor Street. We have no way to coordinate the response. Our crews are sitting in their trucks, blind, waiting for orders." He paused, and I could hear him take a deep breath. "I know this is an insane question, Alex, but your special internet, is it working?" This was it. The moment the ridiculous became the sublime. The moment a spiteful hobby became a critical public service. A switch flipped in my brain. The sarcastic IT consultant receded, and Echo, the Air Force communications specialist, took over. "It's working, officer," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Tell me what you need." I need a miracle," Miller said, his voice cracking. "I need to get dispatch information to fire and ambulance crews. Can you be our dispatch?" "Patch me through to the fire chief's command line," I said, my fingers already flying across the keyboard. "And give me the emergency band frequencies for the county. I'll handle the routing." My office transformed. I pulled up the county's emergency services network, bypassing the local failure point with my satellite uplink. On one screen I had the live weather radar, on another a map of the county, and with a few quick commands I hacked into the GPS trackers of the fire engines and ambulances, their icons popping up on the map. On the third screen, I opened a secure communications grid. My quiet home office was now the fully operational nerve center for the entire county's emergency response. I was a one-man 911. "Okay, Miller, I'm in," I said into my headset. "I see the pileup on I-95, and I'm getting a report of live wires down on Oak Street. Let's get to work." For the next hour, I was a blur of focused energy. I was the calm in the center of the storm, a disembodied voice routing chaos into order. "Engine 4, this is Echo," I said, my voice calm and authoritative. "You are being rerouted to 142 Arbor Street. Confirmed roof fire. Police are en route to secure the scene. Be advised, power lines are down in the vicinity. Approach with caution." "Copy that, Echo," a voice crackled back. "We're on our way." "Ambulance 2, you are clear to proceed to the I-95 pileup. Northbound lane is completely blocked. Approach from the South Access Road. We have reports of multiple injuries. Prepare for triage." In the middle of coordinating the response to a 3-alarm fire and a major traffic accident, there was a frantic, desperate banging on my front door. I ignored it. It got louder, more insistent. "One moment," I said into my headset, putting it on mute. "I'm busy," I shouted at the door. The banging continued, punctuated by a shrill, hysterical voice. With a groan of frustration, I strode to the door and pulled it open. There stood Brenda. She was a pathetic sight. Soaking wet from the storm, her hair plastered to her face, her mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks. She looked completely unhinged, her usual mask of smug authority shattered into a million pieces. "Alex, you have to help me!" she shrieked over the howling wind. "It's the storm! My precious Fluffykins is terrified. He's hiding under the bed and won't come out. I think he's having a heart attack. I called 911 over and over and it won't go through." I just stared at her. The sheer, cosmic, poetic justice of the moment was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. Her, standing on my doorstep begging for the very service she had single-handedly destroyed because of a panicked poodle. I calmly lifted my headset back to my mouth and unmuted it. "Copy that, Rescue 1, I said, my voice all business. "The victim is stable. Proceed with extraction." I lowered the headset and looked Brenda dead in the eye. My voice was quiet, calm, and utterly devoid of sympathy. "Brenda," I said slowly, "are you or your dog currently on fire?" She sputtered, confused. "No, but it's an emergency." "Is your house in danger of imminent collapse?" "Of course not, but then you'll have to wait," I said, my voice as cold as the rain. "I'm currently in the middle of handling several actual, life-threatening emergencies that have been severely complicated by the fact that the 911 call center has no internet. You know, because some idiot with a pair of garden shears cut the main cable. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to save some lives. I'll put Fluffykins on the waiting list right after the multi-car pileup and the house fire." I closed the door in her stunned, rain-streaked face. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and without missing a beat, routed an ambulance to a report of a man having a heart attack on the other side of town. The real heart attack. Brenda and Fluffykins could wait. The next day, the sun was out, shining brightly on a neighborhood that looked like it had been through a blender. Fallen branches littered the lawns, and a sense of collective exhaustion hung in the air. My story, however, was just beginning to catch fire. The local news, desperate for a hero story after the terrifying storm, ran a piece on the pajama dispatcher, the mysterious Echo who had single-handedly run the county's emergency response from a home office. They didn't have my name yet, but Officer Miller, when interviewed, described me as a civic-minded citizen with a very particular set of skills. The internet, of course, did the rest. Within hours, the Whispering Pines Watcher account was linked to me, and my legend was born. The mayor called me personally, his voice booming with gratitude. He offered me a key to the city, which I politely declined, asking instead if they could just fix the pothole at the end of my street. Officer Miller stopped by that afternoon, not in his official capacity, but as a guy bringing a peace offering. He handed me a box of donuts. "You know," he said, leaning against my doorframe, "for a guy who just wanted to be left alone, you cause a hell of a lot of trouble, Alex." "I'm a disruptor," I said with a shrug. "It says so on my business cards." "Well, disruptor," he said, taking a bite of a cruller. "The city is intrigued by your setup. The brass at Emergency Management were wondering if you'd be interested in consulting on a complete overhaul of our communications network. Basically, they want you to build them a Skynet." A slow smile spread across my face. "I'll draw up a proposal." As for Brenda, her downfall was swift and total. She was facing a raft of felony charges, from destruction of critical infrastructure to reckless endangerment. The story of her begging for help for her poodle while I was dispatching ambulances to actual emergencies became a legendary local anecdote, the punchline to a cautionary tale about petty tyranny. The HOA board, in an emergency session conducted via a group text, not only removed her as president but also voted to dissolve her Architectural Purity Committee entirely. A week later, a "for sale" sign appeared on her lawn. She sold the house at a loss and, I later heard, moved to a remote cabin in a state with no HOAs, no cell service, and, most importantly, no internet. My friends, Hector and Dave, saw their fortunes change overnight. A-Team Infrastructure was awarded a no-bid city contract to design and install my proposed county-wide emergency backup system. They were suddenly legitimate. Their black van replaced by a fleet of shiny new work trucks with their logo emblazoned on the side. They were still Hector and Dave, but now they were rich Hector and Dave. A few months later, life had settled into a new, more interesting normal. The new HOA president was a laid-back, retired botanist who, in his first official act, declared, "My magnificent, thriving sunflower, a symbol of community resilience and a beacon of individuality. It was now protected by its own bylaw." My life was no longer quiet, but it was better. My work as a consultant for the county was challenging, fascinating, and deeply rewarding. I was still solving problems from my office, still in my sweatpants. But now those problems mattered. I was on a video call one afternoon, briefing the new head of emergency management on the final phase of the satellite network installation, when I saw a moving truck pull up to Brenda's old house. A new family was moving in. A little girl with bright red hair hopped out of the car, pointed directly at my sunflower, and clapped her hands in delight. I smiled back. I ended the call and opened a secure chat window to an old Air Force buddy. "You're not going to believe this," I typed. "I accidentally went to war with my HOA and ended up privatizing the county's 911 system. It all started with a sunflower." I leaned back in my chair, looking out at my peaceful, well-connected neighborhood. The sun was shining. The birds were chirping. My internet was faster than God's. Yeah, I thought to myself with a deep sense of satisfaction, redundancy is a beautiful thing.